So before I start, first of all, you see the presentation is being recorded. So the recording will be stopped after I finish my talk. So none of your questions will be in the recording. I hope you're all okay with this. The other thing is this talk, I see there's a lot of specialists in the audience, and this talk is specifically for the general public. So it's not going to go into depth in all the topics I'm going to mention. But of course, if you have any technical questions, feel free to drop them on me in the question session afterwards. I'm more than happy to answer all of them. All right. Can you all see my mouse? Jonathan, maybe give me a yes or a no.
Yes.
Yes, we do see your mouse.
Cool, perfect. So I'm going to talk about evolution from the perspective of a geologist. And before I'm going to start with the main part, I think we should talk about the different time scales on which evolution can happen, because geologists tend to have a very skewed perspective on time just because they work over such long time spans, and evolution can also happen over very short and very long time spans. And I mean, we're essentially just right in the middle of one of these evolutionary events that happen very, very rapidly. So what I dug up here is the diversification of the coronavirus, which just happens over a little bit of more of a year. And you nicely see how the Delta variant at the top is essentially just rapidly diversifying. And then in red, you see the Omicron variant, which is essentially outrunning all of our medical technology. But this is one of the end members of how rapid evolution can be. But I will specifically talk about the other end member, so evolution on the very, very large, very, very long scale. And that is a geological time scale. So just to give you an idea and a better comprehension of how geologists think of time is, if you spread your arms like wide out and you think of that the earth formed at your left fingertip and at your right fingertip is the present, these are 4.5 billion years. And only the time span covered by your right hand, for this time span, we have fossils of animals and plants. And these are 500 million years. And I'm specifically going to talk about these 500 million years, which is itself absurdly. So essentially, if you take this metaphor for time span, human history are like the uppermost few molecules of your fingertips, and everything else is just much longer and much more dominant within the history of the Earth. And as a prime example for drastic evolutionary change, I'm going to take it something very popular, which is the extinction of the dinosaurs, which happened around 66 million years ago. And if you look at your hand, this would be around like the last 2 centimeters of your fingertips. So it's 66 million years is a long time, but compared to how old the Earth is, it's really not big. However, the influence of this mass extinction has been really, really drastic. It essentially paved the way for mammals to diversify rapidly. And it also turned the remaining dinosaurs into chickens and birds, which are the closest relatives of dinosaurs that are living currently. And this is really, really well understood on a geologically large scale, which I mean like millions to tens of millions of years. So you find dinosaur fossils before the asteroid hit the Earth, and you don't find them after it. But it's quite common in science that the closer you look, the more difficult the question and the topic actually gets. And I'm going to use this example to demonstrate what kind of problems you can encounter when you try to resolve resolution in high precision in geological timescales. So as an example for where this can be done, there's a small tiny island in Antarctica called Seymour Island. And it is considered to be the best outcrop in the world to study the mass extinction that killed the dinosaurs for some very good reasons. First of all, you find a lot of very, very well preserved fossils. So this is one of the ammonites that is found there. And they're perfectly preserved. You find a lot of them, so you can do a lot of very high resolution, also ecological studies. The second reason is that you actually find microscopic residues of the asteroid that hit the Earth. So you can exactly point at the time and the sediment layer that records how the Earth was hit. And this sediment layer is actually here at this white spot. So here is where you find this iridium layer, where you have the metal iridium drastically enriched, which is the indicator for the asteroid impact. But then something really strange happens when you dig in more detail into this field section and you start analyzing the fossils that are found there. And this is something I did for my bachelor thesis. So this is essentially data from this field section plotted against stratigraphic height, which is just how high you are in the island. And on the y-axis, these are first or last occurrences, which is pretty much a proxy for extinction rate. And if you look at this closely, it is really, really weird, because around 1,007 meters here, this dotted line, this is where the mass extinction happened. So this is where the asteroid hit the Earth and killed the dinosaurs. Here, we have a slight increase in extinction rate, but then around 40 meters below, there's this drastic spike in extinction rate that's more than 5 times higher than this huge mass extinction that pretty much wiped out almost everything that roamed the Earth at that time. And the question is like, what is this? Like, how is this a thing? If this is such a big issue and it had major evolutionary impact, what is happening down here? And how can we understand this? And there's a few different aspects to this. So this has, for example, been attributed to volcanic impact. So this is supposed to be a smaller, minor extinction, but it's still more than 6 times higher extinction rate than the big asteroid impact. And I want to use this contradiction to kind of point out what kind of problems you can encounter when you try to trace these evolutionary changes on such geologically high resolved timescales. And to do this, I'm going to start with actually my title slide. And if you're a geology student, you might actually know this locality because it's really, really famous. It's a tiny spot in Scotland that's called Sicker's Point. And first of all, it looks pretty ordinary if you're not a geologist, but if you're a geologist and your eye is a bit trained, you will see some very odd things. And that is that on the right half of the picture, the rocks are aligned at an angle to the rocks on the left side of the picture. And that is because in the middle, there's what is called a hiatus. So there is essentially rock missing. And turns out there is a lot of rock missing. So if you look at the rock at the right part, this rock was deposited or formed in the Silurian, which was around 430 million years ago. The rock is a marine environment, and it was deposited where this star is. And the world, of course, looked very, very differently. So at that time, for example, life just barely crawled onto land, and the land itself was pretty barren. But the moment we look at the rock deposited on the left side, it was actually deposited 70 million years later. And the locality is pretty close, but it was deposited on land in a river environment. And of course, with 70 million years in between, life looked very, very differently. So you would, for example, have mosses on land, and the first animals and insects started to crawl on the planets. If you would not know about this gap, about these 60 million years of rock missing in between, and you would start collecting fossils at the lower part and at the upper part, of course you would see a drastic change. Essentially, if you would approach this naively, there would be all life on land would be teleported on this planet if you do not know about this gap. And it's really important to recognize these gaps because, I mean, 60 million years is a lot, and a lot of time can be in these gaps. But it's a fundamental problem to actually know how long they are. And to find this out, actually, there's like decades of work into just constraining how much time is missing there. But not all gaps are as drastic as this one. There's what you see quite common in the rock record is what is called bedding. And between these are just like these individual layers of rock here. And between those layers, there's between each of these layers, there's a gap. And these gaps can be quite short. They can be like tens or hundreds years. They can also be quite long, which could be like 10,000 of years where there's just nothing recorded. So they will not find fossils from these 10,000 years that are in the gap. And of course, compared to the 60 million years of the other gap, this sounds really like minuscule. But if you compare it to a human timescale, 10,000 years is a lot. For example, 50,000 years ago, humans arrived in Europe. So if you start counting the bed, if here, oh, let's just take the hard. If this is where humans arrived in Europe, then around at this time, the mammoths would go extinct. And this would be the present. So just in this 1.5 meters of rock, you would essentially have all of human history in Europe be preserved, which is pretty much all of archaeology in not even 1.5 meters of rock, right? So even though all these gaps are a lot smaller, they still contain a lot of information. And just trying to constrain how much information is missing and how long these gaps are is a major part of my PhD thesis. The second, bit more subtle part about what makes reconstructing evolution from the rock record so difficult, it's a bit more subtle, but it's, I would say, maybe even more important because it can be overlooked really, really easily. And this is if you look at one of these plots I showed before from Seymour Island. If you check the axis labels and the units, you see something really strange because this is, we're measuring in meters here. And this is a strange unit for an extinction rate because you would imagine the extinction rate to be like how many species are going extinct per million years or per year or per 10 years. So you want to have a rate per time. You want to have a time unit. But these are not time units. They're essentially length units. And that is because we don't measure time in the rock record, but we measure meters and lengths in stratigraphic height. And that brings a whole lot of issues, and it's a whole can of worms. So you can start to construct something that is called an H model. And these H models are really, really difficult to construct. And their only purpose is to translate the time units into stratigraphic units, so units of meter. So this H model can be read like the following. So at the like 66.1 million years ago, the part of the rock that is around 990 meters was formed and was deposited. So the fossils you find at this height will be approximately 66.1 million years old. And they're a really powerful tool, but also it's very, very hard to construct them. So this will be another major part of my PhD, just trying to develop new statistical methods to construct these H models. They're not really exciting when you apply them to individual fossils, but you can expand them to cover whole time intervals. So for example, everything that was deposited between 66.1 million years ago and 66.05 million years ago, everything in this time interval, you will find in that part of the section stratigraphic height. So if you have 50,000 years of biological change that is right before the extinction, it will be recorded in 20 meters in the section. However, if you have 50,000 years of biological change further down, the H model tells you that all that change will just be in 2 meters in the section. And this has some really crazy implications because it essentially means if the extinction rate is completely the same, then just because the translation from time into stratigraphic height is so biased and skewed, we will observe a 10 times higher extinction rate down here than compared to the upper part. And this has nothing to do with what happened in time. It is just that the rate with which the sediment is forming and with which the fossil record is essentially being recorded changes throughout the section. And what I did is I turned this into a mathematical model, which I do because I'm a mathematician. So essentially, you can just plug in at the most boring extinction rate you can imagine, like pretty much nothing happens. They just go extinct randomly at a constant rate and combine it with the H model. And what happens is really crazy because it just completely changes what we see in the section. So instead of this constant nice rate through time, what we get in the section is a very rapid spike. But this has nothing to do with biological change. It's just an expression of the fact that in these few meters, around 960 meters on Seymour Island, a lot of time is contained within the rock than, say, at the upper part. So it's essentially trying to watch a movie that randomly changes how fast it is being played. And at the part where you have the spike, it is just played very, very slowly. So a lot of change will happen very fast. And here it's just essentially you're watching the Matrix and everything is really, really rapid. And with this perspective, we can now go back to the section on Seymour Island and try to disentangle why there is this drastic spike in extinction rate. So here we have, again, the KPG boundary where the big asteroid hit. And here are the first and last occurrences around 40 meters below. Now, the point I'm trying to make is it's not really relevant to look, or it's not only relevant to look at how many fossils or did go extinct. The question we need to ask, like, okay, so we see this spike in extinction rate in like 2 or 3 meters. But the question is like, okay, but how long did it take to form these 2 meters? If it's 1 million years, then that would be like 5 extinctions per million year. That's not really a lot. If it would be 1,000 years, that would be really, really drastic. So the question is really not how many species are going extinct, but how fast is it actually? Because if we're just looking at the rock record, extinctions per meter are not really interesting. We want to know extinctions per time unit. And there has been a lot of research on the section over the last almost 50 years, I would say. And a usual attribution, so there's a long-going fight, and I'm not going to take positions within that fight. But one line of argument is like, okay, we know there is volcanism right before the asteroid hit. So what we see here is a spike in extinction rates due to volcanism that has just a very strong local effect on this particular section. Whereas what we see here at the top part is the global effect of the asteroid hitting the Earth and essentially killing all the dinosaurs and the ammonites. The other part is essentially what I just explained, that we only see a condensation of time and we only see so many extinctions because the rock here just contains a lot more time than it does in the other parts of the section. There is one point that suggests that the condensation hypothesis is a bit better, because if there is more rock contained or more time contained just in these few meters, everything will be faster. So you will not only find more extinctions, you will also find more new species appearing, and you of course will find more fossils because there's more fossils dying at the same spot over that time interval. And this is exactly what we see. So the spike is not only in extinctions. So we see new species popping up. We see, of course, all of these going up, but we also see a very drastic spike in fossil findings in general, and also in ammonites. So this is, I would say, a very good indicator that this is more of a stratigraphic condensation than an actual influence of volcanism. So this is just, these are two of the major factors. And if I would have to summarize all that, it's really, if you try to reconstruct evolution or also ecological change in time, the question is not really what do you see in the rock record, but how long did it take to form this rock record? And how much of the time is actually not being preserved? And of course, yeah, watching the units and the axis labels really helps to disentangle whether you're looking at something that is a change with stratigraphic height, so change per meter, or whether you actually try to constrain it as a change through time per million years and so on. So I hope you now have somewhat of an idea what I'm trying to achieve in my PhD thesis. I think you can stop the recording now, Jonathan, and I would be happy to take any questions. Thank you.